All right, let's return to a video series that I've really enjoyed working on called Then and Now. The premise is straightforward. I take a photo that I shared years ago and I approach it with fresh eyes and updated editing tools. I really do think this is an important practice for all of us because so much has changed over the years, both with the editing tools at our disposal and our aesthetic preferences. For this third installment in Then and Now, we're going back 11 years to 2014, when I took a bunch of photos of the Peter Iredale shipwreck on the Oregon coast. This four-masted steel bark was built in June 1890, ran ashore in October 1906, and then I photographed it 108 years later. Now, the version that I edited in 2014 will illustrate what I thought was visually pleasing at the time, at least to me. I also use different apps to accomplish certain tasks that have since been added to Lightroom. So lots changed since then, and that's what I want to show you right now. So let's dive in. All right, so this is the photo that I took and I edited and I shared back in 2014. And yeah, back then I thought this was visually pleasing, at least to me, and maybe not so much anymore today. But this is an important point. I'm not sharing this to rag on myself, to dump on myself. It's really important to kind of remember that it's okay. And it's probably true that for a lot of us, especially those of us who have been photographing for like 20 years, um, things change. Your aesthetic changes, the tools that you have change. And the reason why I'm not ragging on myself is because I would be willing to bet there's at least one person who's watching this video who's looking at this image over here and they're like, you know what? I like this. I think this rocks. Which is why I want to be careful not to say like, oh, this is terrible. Because you know what? I edited that photo. That was my photo. I made all the choices here and I shared it. And at the time I thought it was good. And if you're someone today who thinks that's good, that's totally cool. But for me at least, I know things have changed for me, and that's the point of this series, and that's what I'm going to walk you through right now. So let's go ahead and drop to grid here. And let me first kind of talk to you about the lens choice here, because this might throw you off a bit. If I look at any of these photos and then I look at the info of the image, you can see a few things. First, I took this with the original Sony a7R, and you see under it, it says 17mm f4. That is my Canon 17mm tilt shift lens. At the time, Sony's cameras like the A7, the A7R, and the A7S, their lens lineup was not nearly as mature as it is today. And I was a Canon shooter before I was a Sony shooter. So I had all these Canon lenses. So I just got a lens adapter and I was able to use way more lenses that were available for Sony natively. Still, the tilt shift lens serves a very specific purpose, and I'll illustrate that to you right here. You can see up here, I have this photo, and then I shifted the lens down, and I got this photo. So if I go back and forth, you can see what I did here. It was basically I took this photo, the top half, and then the bottom half here, and I stitched them together to get this photo here. So it gives me a much more interesting perspective, better rectilinear lines, and overall just a cleaner stitch for the pano. Now, I also, back in the day, used to use an app called Photomatics to combine. You can see I took these three exposure brackets. I would use Photomatics to combine them into these tone mapped images. In the kind of early 2010s, Photomatics was like one of the most popular apps out there, especially for those photographers like me who loved HDR photography. But since then, Lightroom has gotten HDR tone mapping built in, and once they did that, I saw the quality instantly, and I never looked back. I basically never used Photomatics again. So let me walk you through how I will approach this image today. You can see, again, I have two sets of auto exposure brackets. I've got the top half of the shipwreck and the bottom half. I could either, just select these three images, right click, go to photo merge, and then select HDR merge, and then do the same thing here for these three, and then take the two output DNG files and stitch them together. Or I can select these three and then these three, and in one fell swoop, right click, go to photo merge, and then select this third option, which combines the two tasks, HDR and pano merge. So let's go ahead and do that. Now you can see we have the default spherical projection, which to me, I don't like this. This defeats the purpose of using a tilt shift lens. So I'm going to change this over to perspective. And now you can see this is basically where we are with our original photo. And one of the benefits of using a tilt shift lens, if I turn off auto crop, you can see just how little of the image here kind of fell out. Normally, when you use your tripod and you don't get a proper leveling or use the benefits of a shift lens, you'll see you have areas of the image that you either need to fill or crop in when you stitch to pano. But when you're using a tilt shift lens, especially if you properly level your camera first and then you shift, you should get minimal to no areas here where you need cropping. So I'm going to go ahead and turn auto crop back on. I'll go ahead and turn on apply auto settings, which is just clicking the auto button. And normally I would turn HDR on over here, which is 32-bit HDR editing, but because my screen recording software still does not support that, I'll just stick with regular SDR. So let's go ahead and click on merge. And then here you can see this is our tone mapped and pano stitched image. It's indicated with this badge over here where it says HDR pano. So let's go ahead and open this up. Actually, before we do, I'll just compare just so you can kind of see the overall compositions here, just how similar they look to each other. So, you know, we got good results in terms of just the overall pano stitching. Now let's go ahead and actually edit the photo. So first things first, I was here with a few other photographers, so I just want to get rid of that tripod there. So I'll go to remove. I'm using the Gen Remove brush here, and I'm just going to select that and then click on remove. All right, now let's go ahead here to our global editing tools. First thing I'll do is go to the white balance dropper here. And I'll select kind of a neutral gray, which you can see if I just toggle the mute over here, you can see kind of that color cast that was in the image, and this kind of neutralizes it. So it looks a little bit more natural. Now with auto, it also added a bit of a vibrance and saturation boost, which I'm going to undo. I don't want that right now. And then when I look at the tones here, I'm going to open up highlights a bit. I'm also going to push the blacks a little bit more towards 0 right around here. And that's about it. Everything looks good here. I will change the profile to Adobe Landscape. Now, I'm going to go down to the color calibration panel here, which if you don't see in the Lightroom, that's because it is hidden by default. If you're a classic user, you'll see this at the bottom of the develop module called calibration. In Lightroom, if you do want this available, just click on this try dot over here and then select show color calibration. I'm going to increase the blue primary saturation slider. It is one of my favorite sliders in Lightroom. Same thing with green primary. I'm going to boost that as well. Now, if you've watched my editing videos, you know that one of the first things I also like to do is use the point curve here to apply contrast. Speaking of which, actually, the auto button over here when I did auto settings added contrast, so I'm going to reset that as well. I like to add my contrast using the point curve, except using the point curve over here will apply contrast globally. And in this image, I'm going to actually apply one type of contrast to the ship and then another to the rest of the image. And so that's where we're going to spend pretty much the rest of this video, is in the masking panel, which is, like I've said many times, the most powerful area of Lightroom in my opinion. So let's start by working on the Peter Iredale shipwreck itself. There are two ways that we can go about selecting this. The first is to use the adaptive subject mask. So watch, if I click on this over here, you can see it does a pretty good job of selecting what it thinks is the subject. But let me show you another way. In this case here, you can see that it also selected kind of through the Peter Iredale, like it selected the sky, which I don't want. So let's go ahead. I'm going to create a new mask. And the other way that we can approach this is by using objects. Now with objects, you can either use a brush to draw on the object, or you can use a marquee tool, which is what I'm going to do. And so all I'm going to do is make this selection over the ship here. And so just look at the difference. If I hover between the two masks, let me collapse this here. So this is object, this is adaptive subject. And the reason why I bring this up, I mean, it really is significantly better. But I bring it up because there are multiple ways to approach your masks, and it's always worth really quickly experimenting between one and the other. So I'm just going to delete this first mask here. And then, like I always recommend, the first thing you should do is rename your masks. So I'm going to rename this here, and I'm going to call this Peter Iredale. Now, the only thing I'm going to do really quickly is the selection kind of got this area here, which I don't want. So I'm going to click on subtract, and then I'm going to use a brush super quickly, and I'm just going to paint this area here just to remove it. It's no big deal. I guarantee you I could have probably not done that, made my edits, and no one would have noticed, but since it already got a really clean mask and this little bit here requires minimal effort, you might as well do it. All right, now that we have the selection made, I'm gonna go ahead and add my S-curve here to apply contrast. So the first thing I'm gonna do is drop this pin here and deepen the shadow area. Same thing for the highlights, not too much. Then let's work on the mid-tone, so right around there. The other thing I'm going to do is let's zoom in here and add a little bit of texture right around there. A little bit of clarity, not too much. Actually, I'm going to back off on the texture a bit. All right. And then the other thing I'm going to do is the ship itself looks a bit warm. So first, with the S-curve, I'm going to take the refine saturation slider here and I'm going to bring it to about halfway. Because when you apply an S-curve or any point curve manipulation, it also adds a bit of a color saturation boost. So I'm going to bring this about here. And then I'm also going to take the temperature slider and I'm just going to cool this off just a bit. And the last thing I'm going to do is drop the exposure just a bit as well. So just maybe like a third of a stop, right around there. Actually, yeah, negative 0.16. That looks good. So let's look at this mask here. You can see what it does. It just adds really nice contrast. We added some more detail. And I kind of neutralized, I think, the warm tone to the ship itself. I think this looks a bit more natural. Now, what I want to do is apply a different type of contrast or different S-curve to the rest of the scene. So a really easy way for me to quickly do that is to click on this try dot here next to the mask and then select duplicate and invert mask. So basically it makes a new selection and it just flips what was selected here. Now you can see it says Peter Iredale inverted. I'm just going to rename this and I'll call this background. And for the background, all I'm going to do here is apply another kind of S-curve. So something like this. Again, we're going to drop the shadow area, make it a little deeper. Let's boost the highlights a bit. Midtones will go right around here. And then as usual for this, I'm going to take the black point and I'm going to lift it up right around here. Probably right around there. The other thing I'm going to do is take the white point and drop it down. And that's going to kind of also soften the highlights in the sky. And so let's look at this S-curve here. You can see the background just kind of looks, I mean, it looks a little punchy. This, I think, flattens it out and it just gives it a really nice look. I'm also going to drop the saturation slider here, but only about 25% down. All right, now I want to bring more definition to the sky because you can see it looks like it's been kind of washed out. So let's go up here. We're going to create a new mask and I'm going to select sky, which will make an adaptive sky selection, which does a pretty good job. But there is a secret trick that I introduced a long time ago. It was part of another editing workflow video that I shared. And I don't know how I discovered this. I have since made a dedicated video about this technique, but basically, if you take your mask here for the sky, let's actually rename this really quickly. We'll call this sky mask, and you intersect the sky with the sky, you'll get an even sharper selection. So the easiest way to do this is to press and hold on the Option key on Mac or Alt on Windows, and you'll see the add and subtract turn into an intersect button. So let's click on this and click on sky again. And I don't know if you caught that. Let me undo. You look at the ship here and look at kind of like the horizon, and then I'm going to redo. And I'll just do this quickly. Do you see how much cleaner that sky selection gets? That's kind of my secret trick here of intersecting the sky with the sky. And so for this sky mask, all I'm going to do is add some dehaze. And you can see not too much. Like now we're getting back into kind of the 2014 territory. But I do think somewhere right around here looks good. It starts to bring out some of that really nice definition in the clouds that are there. I'm also going to go ahead and drop the highlights just a bit in the sky. It's getting a bit too punchy for me, so right around there. All right, the next thing that I want to do is create a custom vignette. Now, normally I could just go to the global edit stack here and then go to vignette under effects, but that just darkens the image evenly from the corners of the image, which I don't really want. I want to build my own vignette. So let's go back to masking here. I'm going to create a new mask and I'm going to select radial gradient. And let's go ahead and make a selection right around there. Now, currently the selection is inside of the radial gradient, which I don't want. So all I need to do is click on invert and that will flip the selection. Now, the problem here is that if I drop exposure, you see how we're also darkening the Peter Iredale, which I don't want. I mean, I actually like the way this looks awesome, but I want to preserve the Peter Iredale. So first thing, let's rename this. We're going to call this custom vignette. And then I want to restore the Peter Iredale or subtract it from the radial gradient. So let's click on subtract. We know that the objects selection tool works really well here. So we're going to make that same selection over here, right around there. And then boom, you can see how the Peter Iredale has been cut out from the selection. Now, the exposure setting actually looks really cool, so I'm not going to touch that. I will open up highlights a bit, even though I dropped it before. I think this looks really good here. And I'm going to drop shadows. But here's the thing. I'm actually going to make this even darker. Yeah, get it really moody. The problem for me, at least, is that this dark area here, it's too dark from the vignette. Like, in fact, what I want to do is I want to make this vignette just even closer to the center, something like that. And so I want to preserve kind of the darkest areas here. And so I can go back to my mask here, click on subtract. In this case, I'm going to use a luminance range, and I'm going to click right here. And you can see what it did was it kind of restored part of that vignette. But I do want to refine this a bit. And so first thing I can do here is use this right bumper. You can see if I bring it to the right, it removes more of that kind of dark range. But if I bring it to the left, it brings a little bit of it back, which I want. Same thing if I drag the right control here, you can see, so I bring it to the left and right. Basically, I'm going to find a spot right around there. And if you want to see the effect of just that luminance range subtraction, just click on the mute next to it over here, and you can see what it did. You see kind of like here, it's a bit too dark, but we were able to restore it pretty naturally just by adjusting this luminance range. And the last thing I want to do is draw the eye a little bit further down. And so to do that, let's go ahead and select a linear gradient. I'm going to click and drag down right around here. But again, I don't want the Peter Iredale in the selection. So let's go ahead and, just like before, subtract objects and make our selection around the Peter Iredale. And boom, we cut that out. And so all I'm going to do is drop the exposure even more, just a bit like that. Maybe even a bit more right there. But I will bring out the highlights somewhere there. Okay. And so let's see what that does here. And then let's rename this. And we'll just call this darken top of sky. And so just to illustrate the power of masks, let's see what this image looks like without any masks applied. So I'll click this top mute over here. You can see we have a good foundation. You know, we made a few global edits to the image, but when you apply masks selectively, I mean, it is so powerful. That's why I say that this masking panel is the most powerful part of Lightroom. Now, there's one last thing that I want to do, and that is to use a new tool that we added to Lightroom 9 at Adobe Max in LA, and that is the Color Variance tool. So I want to apply it specifically to the Peter Iredale, which I already have this mask here. And what I want to do is pull apart or increase the color contrast of the rust. So let's go down to point color. I'm going to select the dropper here, and I want to select the color that I want to push away from. So let's go ahead and I'll select something right there. And I'm going to take the variance slider, and you can see if I bring it to the left, the colors kind of start to harmonize. They start to come together. But if I bring it to the right, they push apart. So you can see if I go back and forth, the difference. And so I really like this here. I'm going to push this more to the right. I think that looks phenomenal. Again, if you want to compare the effect, that's without any color variance. That's with color variance. So last thing we have to do here is let's apply some sharpening. So for sharpening, I generally like to do two things first. I like to take the radius slider and bring it to 0.5. That reduces the kind of width on either side of every edge of where sharpening will be applied. And then I'll take detail and move this to 100. Let's zoom in over here. I mean, already it has some really fantastic details, but I'm going to press and hold on the Option key on Mac, Alt on Windows, while dragging the amount slider. And I'm looking at the image. You see this, you can start to see it gets crispy, right? Like the details get super crispy. So I'm going to bring it right around here. Then let's zoom back out and let's remove it from areas like the sky and the sand where we don't need it with this masking slider. So press and hold on the Option or Alt key, drag on masking, let's bring it to right around here. And there we go. So now let's go ahead and drop to grid here. Let's take the original photo and our 2025 edit. Let's go into compare mode. Let's actually swap these. And so, yeah, I mean, the same subject, same composition, but what a wild departure over the course of 11 years. Like, again, adding HDR into Lightroom really saved a step, and I feel like it gave me a much better kind of foundation to start with. But then also the tools, the improvements to masking, the color variance tool, all of these things come together to really provide, in my opinion, just the best tool set for any photographer. All right, so there you go. I hope this kind of also inspires you, especially if you've got a deep backlog of photos that you've edited like over the years. Go back to them with a fresh set of eyes and some new tools and see what happens today. Now, there is plenty beyond what I showed you here for Lightroom on desktop, mobile, and web. And if you want to learn more about all of that, please do check out my course called Lightroom Everywhere. I just updated it with all of the new tools from Lightroom 9.0. I'll leave a link to it in the description below. Now, if you missed the second installment of Then and Now, I've got that right here, or you can see what YouTube thinks you might like over here. Of course, clicking on the thumbs up button greatly helps the channel, as does clicking on subscribe and the bell icon to get notified of all future videos. Thanks a lot, everyone.